I did this once when I filmed my daughter's high school. She had to make a movie for art class in high school. Hi, I'm Jon Coles, and I sell feathers for a living. Well, the story began when my wife, who wasn't my wife yet, attended St. John's University. And in her classroom, she made friends with a lady who became engaged. That's how, you see a ring on someone else's finger, you start to talk. My wife was engaged to me at the time, and they became friends. And it turns out that this lady was marrying a fellow named Anthony. Anthony became my best friend. Anthony's grandfather and father and brother were feather dyers. And Anthony and I, we started up a feather, but he had a feather business going, and he asked me to work for him. I had been a school teacher, but he kind of sucked me into the feather world. I don't regret it. The money was good, and of course it's always nice to work with friends. I worked with him for close to 30 years. From what I recall, my first job with theater was for the Broadway show Sugar Babies, starring Mickey Rooney and Ann Miller, and the costumes were designed by, I think it's Raoul Penny Dubois. He did the sets also. And among other things, they needed feather fans, which I had never made feather fans, but I made those, along with some help from my friends. And then I remember, I think it was Barbara Matera costumes. They had a sketch. They needed something to look like powder puffs. They wanted them made out of marabou feathers. And I decided we would take styrofoam balls, wrap the marabou feathers around them, and then we put a piece of what I call rat tail or soutache through the ball, tied a knot. And they wanted basically what looked like a powder puff on a string, and they put them all over some of the costumes. And I was hooked. I loved theater after that. What usually happens is the designer will send a shopper over with some sketches, and the shopper sometimes has an idea of what the budget might be. The producer will tell them, we only have X amount of dollars to spend, or spend like a sailor, whatever you like. And they will show me what they have, and I will show them different feathers and give them the various prices, and they take that back to the designer. And if the designer likes what I've shown them, then they'll ask the producer if this is in the budget, I guess, and then they purchase it from me. See, if they have drawn something that looks like this, then I'll sell them this, or it might be longer, If they've drawn something that looks like this, they might draw something that's, it used to be egret, but you can't do egret anymore, it's against the law. So we imitate egret by burning some ostrich feathers, and we get as close as we can. It's a poor substitute, but it works, There was a period of time when feathers were extremely popular. The feather dyer used to call that a Eugenie season, because there was a Princess Eugenia years ago who wore some feathers on her hat, and it was all over the news. I can't remember, it was a long time ago. And all of a sudden every woman had to have similar feathers on her hat, whether it was marabou feathers, ostrich feathers, pheasant feathers. They all had to have feathers on their hats, and the feather dealers just couldn't keep up with the demand. At that time there were probably 30 or 40 feather dealers in New York alone. And now we're down to just a few, but that was the Eugenie season time. Everyone made money in those days. Is there a difference between stage and fashion? When you work with feathers for fashion, the dress or the gown that the feathers are going to be put upon, sewn onto, might be worn just a few times. But when you do feathers for stage, everything has to be a little sturdier, a little more. If it's fluffy feathers, they need to be a double fluffy feather, not a single as you would use on a piece of fashion.
Why?
Well, when you have feathers that are going to be on stage, they have to read a certain way from the balcony. So if you just put a single plume onto a costume, from far away, it doesn't quite look like a single plume. But if you make it a double plume, then even from far away, the density makes it read properly. It reads properly from the audience. So you have to just do everything a little bit. And of course, you have to stitch it together in such a way that it will last for years, for 8 performances or 9 performances a week. The first time we did lacage was probably around 1975. It was the single biggest feather order I had ever gotten up to that point. And it was just, they had done it, they had designed it so well. They had the name of the character and what type of boa the character got. For instance, Alban might have a 10-ply ivory and white mixed ostrich boa, a certain length. And if they needed a second one, I had a Bible that I could look at and just remake the same thing again over and over. Then the second time we did lacage was probably 25 or 30 years later, and that was William. And that was a feather experience I'll never forget, because he bought every single red and pink feather that I had in stock, no matter what it was. And I think he put them all on stage. It was amazing. There are a couple of musicals that come to mind as my favorites. It's really not fair to ask me this question, but I loved Hairspray, and I also loved Wicked. There were just some very interesting things to do for those shows, as far as combinations of feathers, combinations of colors, some handwork that I could do myself, and it was just very rewarding doing that work. There's a boa like this that on stage someone might have to do a thing like this with it. So it doesn't work so well if you just have the whole thing made out of feathers. So maybe you take a little bit of window sash chain and you sew 6 or 8 inches of it into the end here. And then when you do that same motion, it really flips extremely well, makes it much easier on the performer. So we're usually told to do that, you know, if the choreographer needs certain things done, we do that for them. I once had to make a jump rope out of ostrich feathers for a 16-year-old girl who was in a pageant, or maybe she was 17 or 18, I forget. But because when you try to do jump rope with ostrich feathers, they really don't move like a jump rope would. So again, we took the window sash chain and we sewed it in the thing, so that when she did that, she only had to do in her act, she only had to do the jump rope 3 times. And we sewed the sash chain into this, and it worked fine. If somebody wants to work in feathers, I think the thing that they need most is just, well, it's nice to have nimble fingers, of course, and it's nice to have some brains. But if you have a desire, there's nothing that you can't really learn. Nobody has the skill. Nobody is born with the skill to work with feathers. It's everyone that I know who's in the business, just you had to learn as you went. The most important things to know when you're working with costumes and with theater people is you have to put your own ego aside, I think, and you have to see what does the designer really want, and you have to sort of get inside their head and try to make their dream fulfilled. You have to give them what they want. What they put on paper, you try to translate it into actual 3-dimensional feathers that will be on the costumes, that will be what their vision was. You want to help them realize their vision. And if you can do that, you'll do well with costuming and feather costuming, and it's a good life lesson in general also. A long time ago, the company would employ more than a couple of guys or gals to twist these by hand. And the way it was twisted by hand was, you would twist a little bit. As you got down to the end, you'd be throwing it over your shoulder, twisting a little bit, throwing it over your shoulder, twisting a little bit, throwing it over your shoulder. It took quite a while. And then we hit on the idea of why not make a machine with a foot pedal. Oh, this is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. So just a little more steam and this thing will be hung up, and somebody might walk in the door and buy it. Or they'd see it and say, can you make me a white one? Can you make me a brown one? So there you go. Now this, beautiful job here. Beautiful job.
Thank you. I'm fast.
The trick here is to try and not let the steam hit the curl, or it will take the curl out of the feather, and then you have to recurl it. So we're getting there. This will be known as a double plume, curled and bent. And it's just about ready.
What is this one used for?
This would be used for if there's an Elizabethan play and they need a feather in someone's hat of this length. When the Broadway show Hook was being done, we had to make one, we had to extend it with extra feathers and make it look like a yard long, which the feathers don't come that way in nature. And we did the similar thing. There you go.
And how old is this technique? Like, what's the story with
This
that?
technique probably goes back further than Elizabethan England, I would say. I assume it was done in France first. The musketeers would wear feathers that would be curled a little bit, gentle curl. It doesn't get better than this.